I can't record all of our glorious moments. Glorious!
Are you recording now?
Yeah. What's up, beautiful jellyfish? It's Tracy. Rocking my American Alpha shirt and John's John Cena.
Who's that?
You can't see me! My time is now!
How are we recording this right now?
Oh yeah, I can't even see you.
You can't even
You're
see me!
Ghost!
A ghost.
Hashtag just wrestling things. Okay, so we're gonna be talking about this sweet deck that John brewed up, and I was like, we need to do a deck tech on this deck because it's jank and I love it, and I love jank things, and...
Jank? That's rude.
You're the Gore Clam Rampager. People don't even know what that card does.
I'm your guest, and you call my decks jank? That's incredibly rude.
Okay, I do jank things too. You're not...
Gore Clam Rampager is not jank.
Yeah, it is. No one even knows what that card does.
Yes, people definitely know what that card does.
No one knows that card. Alright, so this is like a zoo deck, but it's not like a typical zoo deck.
It's a very aggressive zoo deck.
Yeah, it's like... This deck's just sweet. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does cool things.
Yeah, where do you want to start?
So we're going to start with the creatures. Talk about Goblin Guide.
Goblin Guide.
People don't run that in typical zoo decks. They just run it in Burn. I
That's
don't
not
know.
true.
I haven't seen it in really
They
too
play
many
it
zoo
in
decks.
zoo.
They play it in
It's
zoo? Okay.
a staple in most red aggressive decks.
It's a 1-mana 2/2. You want this on like turn 1, and then you smack your opponent with it.
Yep.
And then you get to see their top card, which is really good for card advantage purposes. And if they get a land, you're like, whatever. But you get to see what card is on top of their library, which is great.
Yeah, you know what my least favorite thing to do with Goblin Guide is? Flip over the removal spell that's going to kill the Goblin Guide, and then Goblin Guide goes, oh, that's how I'm going to die now. He sits there and stares at a Path to Exile on top of their deck and goes, oh.
That's awkward.
It's mad awkward, but it happens all the time.
It's always really great. Like, I like playing against Goblin Guide when I'm playing, like, Blue-White Control, because then I'm like, I have so many lands in the deck, because you run, like, 26 lands, and you're like, oh, cool, thanks, I'll take this fetch land or whatever. That's sweet. But yeah, Goblin Guide's still really sweet. It's one of, like, the best red 1-drops.
You know my absolute favorite thing with Goblin Guide is?
What?
Making my opponent discard.
I was actually just thinking that. I was like, I'm sure that happens.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Like, sometimes, yeah.
Happens all the time. They play a land tapped, and that's all they do. And then Goblin Guide gives them a land, and then Goblin Guide untaps and gives them another land.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there with a billion lands in their hands, and they're just like, move to discard, uh-oh.
That's
and I'm
so
like,
awkward.
Good thing you had all that card advantage.
Yeah. Well, still, the access to information is still, like, really important, which is why
it does
that's, like, super cool. Okay, then one of my personal favorite cards is Vexing Devil, and I feel like this should be in burn decks, and I don't know why it's not, because it's just really good. It's like a 1-mana, like, potentially 4/3, or a 1-mana Lightning Bolt. Or more than Lightning Bolt, sorry, it deals 4 damage. Sorry, your cards are in Japanese, and I can't read Japanese.
The problem is, within burn, though, is a lot of times, people run a lot of removal.
Yeah.
So the creatures in the burn decks are very limited. And a lot of times you just go Vexing Devil, and they're like, yeah, you can sit and play because I have this removal spell. It's not going to be good anywhere else.
Yeah. But then they waste the removal spell on that rather than, like, one of your other sweet creatures, so...
It does help.
It's kind of a nice, like, one thing. So you'd rather than, like, path your Vexing Devil versus your...
Eidolon.
Yeah. Or whatever.
In burn. But in this deck, yeah, there's plenty of other creatures I'd rather save.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the card's really good.
It's good. It having 4 power is incredibly relevant in this deck. It is the biggest creature in the deck, power and toughness-wise, that you actually cast.
Yeah.
And it evolves Experiment 1, which is a card we get to later. It's super relevant.
Yeah, card's great. And then we have Curdape. This card just got reprinted in Eternal Masters.
Yeah, Curdape's good.
And it's really good. It's just casually like a 1-mana 2/3.
Yep. It's really good.
You're gonna have a forest.
It's been in Zeus, and Zoo was invented millions of years ago.
Yeah. A long time ago.
Yeah, Zoo's been a deck that's been floating around forever. In Standard, and Extended, and Modern, and Legacy. It's always been a deck that's been around. There's been a lot of variations on it, but Curdape's always been there.
Yeah. The card's really good. 1-mana 2/3s are really sweet. I like it.
Yeah.
Speaking of 1-mana 3/3s, a step above Curdape, is Wild Nacatl?
Yes.
Wilder Nacatl? Oh, because this is
Because
in...
mine's in German.
Oh my gosh, I was like, wait, did I not know what this...
No, it's Wild Nicodle.
Wilder Nicodle. That's so funny.
But see, you play German ones because it wins the mirror match. Because your Nicodles are wilder.
Wilder Nicodle, yeah, absolutely.
So your Nicodles are better because they're wilder.
They're better. I love it. Yeah, 1 mana, 3/3s.
Yep, it's
like
the most
really
efficient.
good.
It's the most efficient threat in your deck.
Yeah.
Like by far, it's the best creature in the deck.
Yeah.
And it's the reason to play this deck. And it was banned for a while in Modern because it was so good. They were scared of it.
Yeah.
They were scared of Zoo being too powerful. And then they realized that Zoo's just pretty okay.
Yeah, it's really sweet. I like it. You've done some sweet stuff, which we'll talk about after we're done with the creatures, or when we get to this card, because this card's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have Experiment 1. Remember this card?
Experiment 1's really good. 1 mana, 1/1 evolves. That brings back the point of Vexing Devil, because you go Experiment 1, and then you play a Curdape, it evolves it, then you play a Wild Nicodle, it still evolves it, and then your Experiment 1's a 3/3, so that's as big as all of your creatures, but Vexing Devil, if it resolves, regardless of whether they take the 4 damage or let it stick around, it still enters the battlefield, because Vexing Devil's trigger is an enters trigger. So it enters, evolves Experiment 1, and then regardless of what they do with it, Experiment 1 turns into a 4/4.
So
That's why some lists will play Tarmogoyf, but mine's playing Vexing Devil because I want to lower my curve. But they both accomplish the same thing, where they evolve your Experiment 1 more to make it an even bigger threat.
it's interesting though, because Tarmogoyf is just like sometimes like a 4/5 or something.
Yeah.
But Vexing Devil's always a 4/3, and it may sometimes do 4 damage, so it always just kind of sticks around. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So I feel like Vexing Devil's a little bit more versatile, and it's also 1 less mana.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Is this 1 less
One
mana?
less mana. Yeah. Because you want to like kill your opponent on turn like 4, 3, ideally. You can do that in his deck.
Yeah, you can do that very easily in this deck.
And speaking of things, I remember when this card was in like Standard, and I was watching like Standard
Me
Pro
too.
Tours, and everyone was running Burning Tree Emissary, but this card's really awesome.
Burning Tree Emissary is really good in this deck because it's 2 mana 2/2, so it's an efficient body.
Bumps up your Experiment 1.
Yeah, bumps up your Experiment 1. Then it adds a red and a green mana, and you have 20 1-mana creatures. So, you can play 2 1-mana creatures right after it. Going like Goblin Guide into Burning Tree into Nicodle Curdape is like the nut draw in this deck, and it's fairly easy to do.
Burning Tree is so amazing, and it synergizes really well with this next card, which is, I think, in my opinion, the best card in the deck, which is Goblin Bushwhacker. Reckless Bushwhacker,
Goblin
sorry.
Bushwhacker's different card.
Sorry, that's the one that was just printed in
Reckless...
the other set that just came out.
No, that one's from Originals in the
that was
the
from
old one.
Originals?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is like the throwback. You know, whenever they return to a set, they like to do a shout out to an older card. So Reckless Bushwhacker was their way of using the new mechanic Surge instead of Kicker, which the original Bushwhacker was. So they didn't want to reprint the original one. So their best way to do it was to print a functional reprint of it. And in this deck, it's actually better because it's easier to cast. The Surge cost is 2, which you can go Burning Tree right into it, where you can't do that with the other one because it's double red to play. This one's red and a 1 to play. So you can go like, you know, turn 1 guy into Burning Tree into Bushwhacker, and you're slamming your opponent for so much damage.
It's so sweet. Like, you've done absolutely nut things, which the next card we're talking about is Simian Spirit Guide. So you're like, exile Simian Spirit Guide, exile Simian Spirit Guide, play Burning Tree into Reckless Bushwhacker. What's like the nut thing that you do? Which is like,
my favorite thing to do is like, you can go like turn 1, play a land, pitch a Simian Spirit Guide, Burning Tree into Bushwhacker, and you're attacking your opponent for 5 on turn 1 with 2 guys that are going to stick around. And then when they go and they play their land, if they want to start dealing with their stuff, a lot of decks have to like fetch and shock in order to get the removal spell for one of the creatures, and then the other one's left around, and then next turn you just play another creature, and your opponent's just so far behind that you can surprise a lot of decks out of nowhere by just running them over.
Yeah. And super sweet. Simian Spirit Guide is really, really awesome. Not really used in many decks.
No, actually the best use of Simian Spirit Guide and Burning Tree Emissary is turn 1 Burning Tree into 2 more 1-drops is actually better than Bushwhacker. Because, you get 5 damage at their face right away if you do it the other way, but if you go like Burning Tree, Experiment 1, Curdape, and then next turn you follow with a Wild Nacatl, you can just run over your opponent out of nowhere.
Also,
you just deal like, what is it, 2, 5, 6, 7 damage on turn 2, and then the next turn it gets even bigger and bigger, and it just snowballs out of control.
But what people don't realize about Simian Spirit Guide is it's also a 3-mana 2/2, so sometimes you just play your 3-mana 2/2.
There have been plenty of times where I've cast a 3-mana 2/2 in this deck.
Yeah.
And you know what? It evolved my Experiment 1.
Involves your Experiment 1. It does that.
Late game, you're sitting there, you have an Experiment 1, and you're like, well, I really wish I had a creature. Oh, it was Simian Spirit Guide. Sweet.
It's a good card that's nuts in the early game, but it's also really pretty okay in the late game, too.
Simian Spirit Guide's also just a good card to hold on to. Like, some hands I'll hold on to it for a little bit, and then, I'll get my opponent when they're not expecting it. Just sometimes not going super explosive, just like being able to leave open spells that your opponent doesn't think you have because of the way your mana is tapped, or, whatever. Like lightning bolting something out of nowhere when your opponent is not paying attention.
That's great.
Which I've done before. They gotta do crazy combat math, and then they do all their blockers in such a way that their spell's gonna blow it out. But, they're like, oh, well, you're tapped out, so they can't possibly do anything. And then all of a sudden you just surprise them with a lightning bolt, and it just ruins everything.
That's amazing.
And then your creatures just end up killing all of theirs.
Yeah.
I did it against Merfolk one time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he vialed in a lord trying to kill all my creatures in the middle of combat while I was attacking him. So he made all these blocks that would be profitable, and then I just lightning bolted the lord and destroyed his entire team.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but I was tapped out, so he was just like, oh yeah, it's cool. We can just do this.
Oh, Simian Spirit Guide does everything. Card's great.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
We hinted at this card in the beginning of the video, but Gore Clan Rampager.
Yeah, this is a slot I've been tweaking for a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been Hooting Mandrills in the past.
Yeah,
which is also really good. They're both cheap 4/4 tramplers. But Gore Clan has the added bonus of being
Blood Rush.
Blood rushing and just destroying opponents.
Blood Rush is just so nuts because this one it gets for 2 mana. This card just does everything because it's like 2 mana. It just gets +4/+4, which is like nuts, and then it gets trample. So if like they block or something, or like, oh, okay, cool. Well, my like Wild Nacatl is going to become like casually a 7/7, and then it's got trample. So say they block with their like 1/1, and you're like,
yeah.
Cool, you take 6, which is nuts.
That's kind of why I was opting for Rampager over Hooting Mandrills, but Hooting Mandrills is just really good because it was. This deck runs a lot of fetch lands, so it's super easy to just like turn 1, or not turn 1, but like by like turn 3 you could just easily play Hooting Mandrills.
Yeah.
Your opponent starts using removal spells and stuff, and then you just play Hooting Mandrills into nowhere.
Yeah.
But Gore Clan Rampager is really good, and the not uncounterability of the ability is really good.
Yes, it's super good. And also, it could just casually be a 4-mana 4/4 with trample. If you like have no creatures on board and you're like, I really need a creature online. It does that too. It's really good. I like how you just randomly have Thalia in here.
So
old Thalia, not new Thalia.
I have one Thalia Guardian Thraben in the main deck. The reason for it was I don't remember what the slot was originally, but I had Thalias on my sideboard because they're really good against removal heavy decks. You can just play a Thalia on turn 2 and just like slow them down enough that you can just run them over. And I noticed that I was sideboarding it in so much that I was like, well, why don't I just try and slot one in the main deck?
What
just
did you
one.
do for it? Do you remember?
I don't remember because I've changed a couple things here and there, like shaved down number on this and up the number on this, and I've played a bunch of different random 1/0s. I think I went down 1 Path to Exile.
Okay.
Because I had 2 in the main, now I have 1.
You're kind of like, you kind of do your own thing and your opponent just kind of does whatever and you're like, I don't really care that much. But that is like a really sweet way of being like, I'm gonna stop my opponent, but it's also a creature, which you want in this deck. It's also just a 2-mana 2/1 with First Strike.
First Strike is really relevant.
It's really good.
Yeah,
really
First Strike's
good.
really relevant.
If you're playing against it and your opponent's tapped out and then you just Reckless Bushwhacker and then you're like, okay, swing with my dude and it's like a 3/1, like that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Really good. Yeah, she's sweet. Then we have a Tarkus Command. I'm very partial to Culligan's Command, however, I do really like a Tarkus Command.
Tarkus Command's the best command.
Really good. Oh, I can't believe you just said that.
It's the best command.
I don't know if I can date you anymore.
It's the best command.
I
Culligan's
really
command,
have to disagree with you.
See, Culligan's Command is only good around the cards that it's good around. Like, it's good with Snapcaster Mage, but without Snapcaster Mage, Kolaghan's Command's kind of meh.
I can't agree with you on this one.
It only deals 2 damage. Atarka's Command deals 3 damage. Okay?
I can't.
It destroys artifacts, which not every deck plays artifacts. It makes your opponent discard a card. Well, what if they have no cards? Then that mode looks stupid.
Okay, you're wrong. I have to disagree with you. Okay, it's fine.
Atarka's Command is the best command.
Okay,
It deals 3 damage.
Leave me your comments below. What's the best command, personally?
And they'll all agree with me.
K-Command, no, you're wrong.
Deals 3 damage.
So, no,
you
you went out of order. You gotta go in order. Okay.
Well, because the 3 damage is the most important one.
Okay.
It gives your team +1/+1 and reach. It's a very important ability. Reach.
What's sweet is you can just put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, so you're like, oh, so kind of like what we were talking about earlier with that Lightning Bolt Simian Spirit Guide thing, like, oh yeah, my opponent can't do anything, and then you're like, Target's Command, play an additional land, Lightning Bolt their thing. Seems really good.
I have done that.
Or you play an additional land, and then you exile Simian Spirit Guide, and then you cast another Atarka's Command?
I heard that the other day in a tournament. He's like, Atarka's Command. He's like, oh, I've never done this before. Put an additional land into play. Fetch. Atarka's Command? And I was like,
yo,
yep.
That's nuts. Oh my god.
Yeah, this guy behind me, I was at a tournament and I overheard it because my opponent was like tanking about what he's going to do, and I just overheard somebody say it, and I was like, ah.
That seems nuts.
Amazing.
That seems super sweet. So good. Yeah, and your team just getting like +1/+1 reach may not be super relevant. Could be relevant if you're playing against like Lingering Souls or something.
Yes, that's usually the matchup where the reach is relevant is like black-white tokens.
Abzan.
Yes.
Abzan.
Lingering Souls. Yeah, Lingering Souls. More so the black-white tokens deck because they have so many flying tokens. Like and then they want to attack you, and you can just jump up, kill their creatures, and then kill them on the crackback.
Yeah, that card's really good. I'm not disagreeing with you, the card is really good. And then the can't gaining life this turn is super relevant in so many things. If they have, like, scavenging use. What are other cards that gain life that I can't think of right now?
Kitchen Finks.
Kitchen Finks.
Actually, a lot of times, this Atarka's Command has only 2 modes in this deck. The life gain is actually not that relevant.
It's not that relevant.
It's mostly pump the team, deal you 3.
Yeah.
Occasionally it's can't gain life, but the majority of the time it's just pump the team, deal you 3.
Yeah.
Because against Burn usually uses the other 2 modes where it's life gain, deal you 3.
Yeah.
Because all of their spells are not recurable. Whereas like all my creatures, they deal 3 damage. And then next turn they deal 3 damage. And then next turn they deal 3 damage. So little bits of life gain don't really affect this deck too much.
Yeah.
Massive amounts will, but little bits like here and there. If one plays a Kitchen Finks, they gain 2, and then they scavenging use, they gain like 1 every so often. Maybe they gain 3 life. It's not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, card's really good. I like it.
Yep.
Lightning Bolt.
Lightning Bolt. That's it. Lightning Bolt.
It's just deals 2 damage. Good. Card great.
Yep.
You run a Mutagenic Growth?
Yes, I run 1 Mutagenic Growth. The reason for it is it's really good against Lightning Bolt.
Yes.
A lot of my creatures have 3 toughness, or 2 toughness. So when you swing into your opponent who plays red, whether it be Jund or Jeskai Control or Grixis Control
or just
Burn, your opponent goes, oh, a lot of people make the mistake of waiting until your turn to kill your creature. Especially with Goblin Guide. They're like, I want that extra advantage. I want to see what he's going to do. I want to try and respond to his combat trick with using my Lightning Bolt. And then I sit there, I do my combat trick, I'm tapped out, they go to Lightning Bolt my guy, and I just Mutagenic Growth through their Lightning Bolt and deal them even more damage.
I did a whole video talking about when to cast instants, and that is one of my... Because people are like, oh, I have instants, so I have to play them during my opponent's turn, and I'm like, no, stop. Sometimes it's best to play during your turn. Yeah. That drives me
Mutagenic Growth and Gorklan Rampager are 2 cards that just get people.
Yeah.
Because you can just use them.
Anytime.
There have been plenty of times where I've Mutagenic Growth on my opponent's turn. Just as a one green mana counter spell to their Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, that's super cool.
It's just a great card to hold around. I basically use it as a counter spell to Lightning Bolt, unless it's going to kill them that turn. Then I'll actually Mutagenic Growth, or if it's against a non-Lightning Bolt deck, then I'll just jam it to jam it.
Seems okay.
It's also a free spell that you can get to Surge your Bushwhacker. So I usually try to hold on to Mutagenic Growth as long as I can. Because you just like Surge your guy, or you Mutagenic Growth your guy and then Surge your Bushwhacker and jam through with everybody.
I'm sorry, I was listening to you, but I got really distracted because I was paying attention to this next card. You run Devastating Summons?
Yeah, this is a throwback to the original Boros Bushwhacker deck that was in Standard the first time Zendikar was around. Devastating Summons was a card that we ran that was it's additional cost to cast it. You sacrifice X lands, and then you put 2 XX elementals into play. And then usually what you do is you get to 3 or 4 mana, you float all your mana, you play Devastating Summons, sack all of your lands, you have like 2 or 3 mana floating, and then you play a Bushwhacker and just jam your opponent with all these big creatures.
Amazing.
Out of nowhere. Yeah, I did it yesterday in testing. I just put 2 5/4s attacking into play.
It's such a versatile card, synergizes amazingly with Bushwhacker, and it's like so
Experiment
good in the late
1
game.
A lot of times triggers twice off of it.
That's nuts.
I did it also yesterday in testing a different game. I Devastating Summons for 4. I had a Experiment 1 on 2, and it evolved twice.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That's super cool.
It's sweet.
That card's really good. I like it. It's so good. And Pat's Exile.
You just one, because sometimes you just need to get a creature out of your way.
Sometimes their Tarmogoyf's like way bigger than your stuff.
Yeah, sometimes I play a Tasker, Gurmag Angler, Tarmogoyf. Kalitas is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
That's the big one that you really need to move out of your way. Kitchen Finks, getting that out of your way is also good, because Kitchen Finks is kind of one of the more annoying creatures, because it trades with your guys.
Yeah, then it comes back.
And then it gains a little bit of life, which is like, that's mildly annoying. But just the path that it is just good.
Yeah. Okay, now we're going to talk about lands.
Yep, this is a pretty, by my definition, standard, like, modern mana base.
2 Stomping Grounds.
2 Stomping Grounds. 2 Sacred Foundries. 1 Temple Garden. I don't like the Temple Garden, but sometimes you need it.
Yeah.
It does. There's a lot of red spells in this deck, so especially when you're playing red spells, you always want to cast a lot of red spells, so you don't really want lands that tap for not red, but this is one of the exceptions because you're playing things like Curd Ape and Wild Nacatl, because they need to trigger, and sometimes you need to do weird things with your mana. There have been plenty of times where I've had to get Temple Garden just to be able to play Wild Nacatl into Thalia or Wild Nacatl into Path. When you still need Curd Ape, but
The deck is primarily red. It's got a little bit of some green, and then
almost no white.
A little bit of white.
There's 2 white cards in the main deck, and the sideboard there's a few more.
But you really need the white for Wild Nacatl, and that's why the white is the most important.
Yeah. You're always going to have a white source. You should always have a white source.
A white source.
But you almost never use it for a white. It's basically just, you get Sacred Foundry, and it's a mountain that happens to tap for a white.
Yeah.
Then there's...
Fetch lands.
Yeah, the Fetch Land Suite is 3 Arid Mesas, 3 Windswept Heaths, and 4 Woodedful Hills. Woodedful Hills is the most important, because it gets all the lands you could ever want. They all get all of the lands, but there's a reason why you're running 4 Woodeds and 3 Windsweeps with a lot, which you'd think with a more aggressive zoo list, you'd play more Arid Mesas, because that's what a lot of people see when they see aggressive decks. They're just expecting red fetch lands everywhere, but there's a reason for more green fetch lands. It's because we run 1 Dryad Arbor.
Card's nuts.
Yeah, a lot of people give me some flack for the Dryad Arbor, but then every time my opponent, especially, it's really good against removal heavy decks, because a lot of times they exhaust their removal and then they're not expecting a creature at instant speed at the end of the turn. So a lot of times what you do is you get to 2 mana, and then basically at that point all your other mana is just extra mana. Like your 3rd mana doesn't really matter too much. Your 4th mana really doesn't matter, because at that point you can cast all your spells. All your spells are 1 and 2. There's no real 3 drops. The only 3 drops are hard casting a Reckless Bushwhacker, which you almost never do. You want the 3 mana maybe to play a 1 mana creature beforehand, but that's about it. But Dryad Arbor can let you do that anyway. So usually when I get to 2 or 3 mana, at that point I'll use a fetch land, I'll leave it up, I'll pass a turn, and then in a turn just out of nowhere a 1/1 comes to play. And then you untap and then you play a creature and a Bushwhacker, and then Dryad Arbor just gets big and just starts rumbling.
It's so good in the late game, because your opponent's like, oh, you have nothing, and you have no creatures, and you're like, well, I'm going to fetch for my Dryad Arbor.
There have been plenty of times where I've fetched for Dryad Arbor end of turn when my opponent's tapped out because they killed all my creatures, and then I've Gorkline Rampager the Dryad Arbor, and out of nowhere they just took 5.
Yo, that's awesome. That's
yeah,
super
sometimes
cool.
you just gotta get them. And Dryad Arbor is just another creature in the deck.
Sweet.
And then it's 1 forest and 1 mountain. You need some basics.
Yeah, and you don't need a white.
Yeah, I don't need a plains. I keep thinking I want to run a plains, but every time I think about it, I'm like, I really can't. But then there's games where I'm like, I really wish I had the plains. But it's such a liability. Even running Dryad Arbor, Forest, and Temple Garden as 3 non-red lands is very, very hard sometimes. Yeah. There have been plenty of hands where I'll open up Temple Garden, Forest, and look at my hand and go, how can I ever cast these billions of red creatures I have in my hand?
Yeah.